Hitting the space bar actually worked.
Okay.
Dad, I think we can do it next time. We can hit the space bar and end it. But I think that was funny. All right. Guys, welcome back to Life at 2030. We're so glad that you're here with us and enduring our craziness. Dad, you're back. And Mom's here today. And
Hi.
I'm so excited we get to, well, we're going to hear from Dad about his 1100, wait, what did you say?
11th East.
11th East winter bus runs.
Well, since we got winter coming up in a couple hours, driving bus in the winter was always exciting. There was a guy on 11th East about 4 South. He had a bus bench out in front of his house, and this guy was an amazing sculptor. And one day I pulled up, and it was snowing pretty hard, and there were 3 people sitting on the bus bench. And as I pulled up and opened the door, they were 3 snow sculptures of people sitting there. And they were amazing. One guy was reading a book, a lady was putting on makeup, and a kid was sitting there in a cowboy hat. And I was amazed because they looked like people who had been sitting there in the snow about an hour and were discovered. And later on that day, I stopped to cross 5th South at 11th East, and I looked up, and there was a barber college up the street, and a guy in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat was waving me down. So I opened the door and I waited for him to come down, and so I looked left and right to see how traffic was so that once he got on we could go. And I looked to the left and saw no one was coming up the street, so I looked to my right to see where the cowboy, if he was on yet, and the cowboy had disappeared. I'm like, where'd the cowboy go? And I looked all around. All of a sudden I looked down, and on the bottom step, 2 hands grabbed the bottom of the step, and the cowboy slid himself out from under the front of the bus. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, I planted my foot ready to get on the bus, and I slipped on the ice, and I slid under the front of the bus.
Oh, slippery cowboy boots.
Yeah. So I asked him if he was okay, and he said, yeah. And I said, what does it look like under there? He said, lots of mud.
Oh.
But he was okay, and so we crossed the street and on our way. And so, you know, icy roads, icy sidewalks. I used to see all kinds of strange things.
You cursed driving in the bus in the wintertime.
It wasn't much fun.
No, especially if you had to run with a hill.
And I really felt sorry for the people out there. It was cold, and cars were throwing snow on them and slush on them, and no one would shovel their sidewalks to help out with the bus stops. And
oh, that's true. I remember you would go through a schedule with me to get up to the U, and that was a cold wait. It really was. And all the snow. Yeah. Well, Mom and Dad, I have you here today. So we talked about Grandpa Holly. We talked about Grandma Holly. And now I'm excited. We're going to wrap it up. We're going to talk about Delta, where they lived. And it's so special to us because that was our family vacation a couple times a year. We'd go as often as we could, or at least once a year, to go see them. And so there's just, I know it was just a 2-hour drive to their house. They had a farmhouse. They had a small town. But man, do we have so much to talk about.
you know, and the thing about it is, I don't ever remember being down there with Aunt Marlena's family and Uncle Dale's family together.
I don't either.
So they all had different experiences than we did. And so, you know, any of Marlena's kids or Dale's kids that would like to discuss their experiences down to Delta, call Julie up and we'll get some experiences, or have you come and get on the podcast, because I know Craig and you guys used to go down and hunt, and I know you enjoyed doing that. And I have no idea what Maureen and Melanie and little Mark like to do down there. No idea. So
And your siblings and their kids. And
yeah, and my siblings, if they went down later, I don't know. So if any of you've got any ideas, let us know.
Yeah.
So all we can talk about is our experiences down there.
Yeah. And what a special place in our hearts Delta has. And I remember the drive. You always worried.
Melanie can't tell us.
Yeah, Melanie can't
Sorry,
tell
Melanie.
us.
You're listening from the other side. Say hi to Mom and Dad for me.
Oh,
And Uncle Mark.
just
And Uncle
special
Dale
people.
and the whole bunch.
That's true. I do remember Grandpa Carling, and I think Joetta and Cammie once we were together, but we were all so little. But yeah, the drive itself, I remember you worrying because you wanted to make sure you had good tires, and you know, a 2.5 hour drive back then was a big deal. And to me as a kid, it felt like it was so far away. But reality is, I live in Eagle Mountain now, and I pass all the time where it used to be nothing.
The intersection of Redwood Road and SR 73 used to have a sign that said Lehigh Rodeo.
And that's it.
And that was it. It was fields on all four corners, very few houses along Redwood.
Even if you go towards Riverton, there really were, it was just
No, between
barely speckled with houses.
Bluffdale had very few. Nothing between Camp Williams and SR 73.
And this was even 20 years ago, and not even that long ago. So it's interesting how much Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, that whole area has just boomed. And it is not just nothing anymore. We just opened up a Costco. There's an announcement of all these other establishments coming, and it's really exciting. And so over the summer, John and I noticed some smoke on the mountain. And so we drove down Redwood Road. Well, you call it SR 73.
Well,
And-
no, SR 73 is the road that intersects Redwood
Oh,
Road.
yeah, yes.
The
So
one
it was
through Lehigh
Redwood.
Main Street?
Yes, sorry. So we go down Redwood to follow the smoke, and all of a sudden I'm looking around and thinking, I think these are the wee bumps we would go over as a kid when we'd go to Delta. And John says, yeah, you keep following this road and you make it to Delta. And I guess I didn't even realize that, because we've lately just taken I-15 to Nephi and to go to their house if we go visit.
Well, you get where do you get to? Erda?
Or Eureka?
You get to Erda and then Eureka
No,
and on
Erda's
around.
out in Tooele County.
What was it? What was that?
I thought it was Eureka or Alberta.
Alberta and then
Alberta.
Eureka and on around to Leamington and Lyndall and
And you totally knew the way.
Oh, yeah.
I always thought we were lost. So I
we
would-
were lost because there was nothing out there.
So we would drive along, and Dad would say, "Do you guys want to go the wee bump way?" So we have to explain wee bumps.
Well, we had a choice. We could either take the west side of Utah Lake, which was the Wee Bump Way, or we could take I-15 to Nephi and then west to Delta.
Which was another half hour.
It was longer. It was shorter to go the Wee Bump Way.
And so we had this green station wagon, and Dad, we would beg him to just gun it, because before they shaved the bumps in the road down, you could get air, Dad.
Yeah, we could get air under the car on the Wee Bumps, and the kids loved it.
Because especially the ones sitting backwards in it, facing
The
the back
station
window.
wagon, the old Dodge Monaco station wagon, had seats facing backwards.
Yeah, we didn't even have to pay Lagoon for
No,
a ride.
it was like a roller coaster ride.
That was the best thing ever. And with such a lonely road, there were a lot of skunks on the road, and we passed
Skunks
so many.
and bunny rabbits.
And Mom, what would you do whenever we passed a skunk?
Oh, dead skunk in the middle of the road. You've got your dead skunk.
She got our whole family eventually singing the song, and it was a lot. We sang it a lot. Because so we basically were just this big happy car filled with people about to go see our favorite people in the world. And so let's see, on the way there, we would pass the Lone Tree Monument. So we had a lot of things that we would look for. Dad, what were some of our guideposts that we'd look for to get there?
Well, Utah Lake, Saratoga, the resort Saratoga. There was a little resort on the west side of the lake called Saratoga Resort, and they had Ferris wheels and
Well, they had a hot water spring. That's why they had swimming pools there, because it was naturally heated water. And we went there as a kid, went swimming and went on the roller. Well, I don't think they had a roller coaster, but a Ferris wheel and probably horse carousel and, some airplane little rides. And we loved going there. And when they stopped having Saratoga Springs, I wondered what was going to happen. And then
Saratoga happened.
oh goodness,
Lots of houses.
wonderful.
But we had mileposts. We had Eureka.
That was our first major one.
A
No,
cute
the
little-
buffalo sign first, and then
Right. A cute little town, mining town.
I liked Eureka. For about a minute, we drove through it.
Yeah, it didn't take long. And then nothing but sagebrush and stuff. And then we would pass the sand dunes. And then on to Delta.
There was a river that always had green water in it.
And we would get to
Can't
Delta,
remember
and
the
Grandma, we'd stop and see Grandma at D. Stevens and Company.
I don't ever remember seeing her there.
Well, she retired, so you probably didn't.
Maybe that was the when I was a kid we'd stop and see.
Probably. What were your favorite milestones to see to get there?
My favorite was the tall tree at their house.
Yeah,
The Lone Tree Monument, I like seeing that because I knew we were almost there.
because you just had one more road to go down.
Well, tell them what your dad said about it. You had to get out of the car,
You had to get out of the car and run around it 3 times and
make a wish or
make a
something.
wish and kneel to it. And
And by that point, you guys are like, can we just get there? We're
Right.
almost there.
And then you would see the tall tree at Grandpa's farm and the barn, and
And then you'd always have to turn at the Husky sign from the
that's
Delta.
it on Main Street
Yep.
in Delta.
And then the Lone Monument, and then there was a 7-mile road, and everyone always tried to see the barn first.
Yep.
That was my favorite. And Allison one day, or one of the drives, she threw her shoe out. And I always called it the NASCAR road, where it was just this big hill and you'd go deep down and then up again. And she threw her shoe out like 5 miles back because I said, Allison, where's your shoe? And she said, out there. So you guys turned around and we had 8 pairs of eyes looking at the road trying to find her shoe, and you found it.
We found it.
That was crazy.
Something about praying and shoes.
We were a persistent family.
We want our shoe back. So then we would pull up, and I remember as a kid just being so excited. And Grandma and Grandpa were waiting for us.
Oh, always at the front door.
And they called out the front door, but wasn't that like the side door? But that was our
Right.
favorite door
Right.
into the
Went
kitchen.
Right into the kitchen.
So you get there, and what would hit me the most was because we were in the city all the time. You get to Delta or Oasis, which is like 7 miles from Delta, and open up the car door, and you kind of go, wow, where's the noise? It's so quiet.
Nothing but a bird here or there.
That was the coolest thing ever. I needed that as a kid.
And you could hear a car coming from like 7 miles away.
Because they were running around the Lone Tree Monument over there.
Or
You
the
could
train.
hear 'em. Yeah, the train. You could hear that too. So I want to talk about the house. And their house was pretty neat. It was built in 1911, and they were the first to have a well and indoor plumbing in the city. I mean, it wasn't a big city anyway, but and it's just a beautiful house. And they lived in the garage before the house. I remember that much. And then
They lived in the garage as they were building the house.
yeah. And so what are some of your favorite things about the kitchen? They had some amazing things in there.
The old wood stove, beautiful old wood stove.
It was like a mint green and cream colored.
The cookie jar.
Do you ever know who ended up with their cookie jar?
No idea.
That would be so cool.
Just the counters all around. I mean,
yeah, the white
The
counters.
bigness.
It was a very big room.
The big sink, and you'd wash dishes with Grandma, and she never wasted a drop of water. In order to get hot water to come out, you'd fill about a 2-gallon bucket full of water, and then she would turn the water off and go dump it on the tree out in the front.
I remember that.
And then so there was one basin for washing and one for rinsing, and we all had a hand towel that we wiped the dishes when Grandma washed them, and she had her yellow rubber gloves on. But
and the little stool with 2 steps on it.
The red chair, we called it.
Chair.
Yes.
The little stool part, you lift it up and pull it down, and then you could step up on it or put your feet there when it was all the way out. And Grandpa, I remember him, would eat those club crackers at night. What else did he have with that?
Always ice cream.
Always.
Or a glass of milk. He would just sit there on that red chair and eat those crackers.
So I remember their blue Electrolux vacuum.
Electrolux vacuum
I would
in the
always
front door
vacuum.
in that storage bin.
And I think at that time it must have been the most deluxe vacuum you could ever buy.
It was really cool. It almost looked like, so it was like this long stick, and then it had the shape of a football almost. Just
Right.
That's where it caught everything. So I would vacuum, and I remember their little, just their little closet where I would always go find the calamine lotion because the 5-pound mosquitoes would get
The
you.
little closet, right, as you ent between the kitchen and the living room.
What else was in there? I only remember calamine lotion.
I don't know.
I think the blue
The
vacuum.
broom was in there and the dustpan and
That's awesome. I forgot about that.
I'd forgotten about that room.
And then right off the kitchen is the bathroom. And there was a story about Sherry with the bathroom that I want you to tell.
go ahead, hon,
She was
tell
like
it.
5 years old.
You know it better than I do.
Well, the bathroom door had a slide lock on it. And Sherry, I'm not sure how old she was, but she locked herself in the bathroom with that slide lock.
She was like 4 or 5.
Yeah, so she was the only one that could unlock it. Nobody could from
We
the outside.
couldn't get in it from the other side, and this door was solid. So our only options was all the hinges were on the inside of the bathroom, so we couldn't get that way. We could break one of the windows in the bathroom and get in, but we talked Sherry through opening the door.
And she finally did.
And she finally did it. Figured out how to lift the little thing up and then slide it back.
I think you said that about 100 times, and she's like, "What?" But if you've never done that before, that's hard for a little kid. So then from the bathroom, you'd walk back to Grandpa's room, and he had a stand-up freezer where all of Grandma's cookies were. I didn't even ever realize as a kid that all of her cookies were in the freezer, or we would have raided that freezer. I'm not even kidding you.
And he had a closet in there that had a little bit of food storage, but it had all the blankets and sheets and a lot of that stuff in that closet.
And then going from his room, you would walk by the creepy stairway.
The furnace was right there.
Oh, yeah. The furnace to the right, the stairway to the left, right?
That went upstairs, yeah.
And then you'd go into Grandma's room that was this elegant, spacious room that had her own door that she could keep open and have the screen, let the cool air in.
Let the cool air in, yep.
And then from her room was the slippery room. That was our favorite. I loved the door with the little squares of glass.
Yep.
And but why did we call it the slippery room?
Because it was linoleum and it was slick.
And she had an ottoman on wheels that we would glide across.
Right.
You could glide along in your socks quite well, too.
But it was loud too, and after a while you guys were like, okay, stop. Stop.
Well, that room had 2 huge wooden sliding doors into the living room.
It was called
The
a parlor.
parlor
So
door.
it was
Yeah.
parlor, so you could expand the living room in the olden days.
Because this house was so grand that they would use it for dances and open up that parlor door so they could use that big slippery room. And then the living room was massive.
Right.
And the ceilings in the living room were so tall as well. And I love the shag olive green carpet.
Yep.
And the living room just had enough space for everyone. They had a hide-a-bed in there, and the front entryway, it was just this cool nook with the most beautiful wood and the varnish, and it was like a cherry wood with
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And there
Just
was
beautiful.
a bench, and underneath the bench was coloring books and George the Giant book that everybody
George the
loved.
Gentle Giant.
George the Gentle
That Grandpa
Giant.
would read to us and in his voice. Oh, I wish we could have recorded that with him. And Sherry and I have. Do you guys have the George the Gentle Giant?
sure
book?
Allison
I have that.
Sherry got it from Allison.
I love that book. What was? Oh, well, hold on. We'll finish. I think that's it. There was an upstairs in the house.
Yeah, there was an upstairs. When you got to the top of the stairs, you turn left, and there was a room there that Grandpa had his gun cabinet, his cough medicine in the gun cabinet,
The
and
100-year-old.
a whole bunch of hunting clothes hanging in a closet up there. So duck clothes and just hunting clothes, jackets.
And it was interesting when Cliff and I went to just to go discover upstairs, because we never really had the courage to do that as kids. But maybe the weekend before they moved, we were there, and there really wasn't much up there. Just 3 empty bedrooms and the big water tank.
The big water tank was up there.
That
used
was
to-
huge.
Well, it held 500 gallons.
Okay.
And they built, that's where the well filled that up.
Okay.
So you would fill it with the well, and then you could turn the well water off and use that throughout the house. That's where the indoor plumbing came from.
That was
Was
some
that
major
tank
water
upstairs.
storage. So that poor bedroom was just basically the water tank, and you
Right.
could barely
Right,
fit
but
anything
people
else
slept
in there.
it. I slept upstairs for
In
a
the
couple
water
of
tank
summers.
room?
No, the end of the hallway was the bedroom, and an old creaky bed, and it was fun to sleep up there.
Was that where the bats were?
Yeah, the bats moved in.
Oh,
Smelly.
it had an interesting smell. What was your favorite thing about their house?
Just
The-
being there.
The feeling of home, because home is really a feeling.
It's so true.
And when we went there, we were home.
It felt like
And they
that.
were so far away from us. We felt.
Right. So it was really exciting to see them when
Yes.
we go. And so let's discover the outside. All the structures that they had and all the cool things to explore. They had so many old things.
Because it was an old farm.
So at that point, didn't Grandpa have like 220 acres?
240.
240. So he had
He grew wheat.
Hey,
He grew hay.
a big red barn. I don't remember ever seeing it red, actually.
No,
right.
I don't think
All
we
the
ever
paint
painted it
had-
red.
All the paint.
Big
had
wooden
fallen off.
beams inside. I mean, literally a foot by a foot beams. Hand cut beams inside, and
I remember at
places
night
for hay, and
looking up there, and there were owls that lived
Oh,
in
wow.
there was an owl that lived up there.
So you had the barn. I don't think there was anything around the barn,
Nope, there
there. Oh, a
wasn't.
corral for when they had the cows.
right? And then you have the house, and behind the house was a
Behind
really
the
cool
house
thing.
was the root cellar, and the tack storage was upstairs. Fishing poles, all the fishing gear,
And that room,
a lot of the
actually,
hunting stuff.
a little family of 5 lived up in that tack room for a little bit.
Yeah.
I know. And then the tool shed
And
was
then the tool shed had the pump that pumped the well water. At the far end of the tool shed, there was a cement holding area, and the pump would pump the water with a big thick belt and a pulley, and you would plug it in or crank it, and it would crank the well water that was in there and pump it.
I don't even remember seeing that. I think I was too focused on all of Grandpa's old tools
I used
and
to
everything
go in
in
there.
there.
We used to go in there and fix parts on the tractor and stuff.
Okay.
So there was a big workbench in there, and
So I have a picture of the tractor that might be on the podcast, like the thumbnail, and that was just a chicken coop it was in, right? That he parked, that was kind of leaning over.
The tractor had a shed.
It was its
All
own
the
barn.
tools were there to work on the tractor. Used to put a couple of implements in there. The plow was in there.
That tractor was amazing. I remember when Grandpa would announce that he was gonna get the tractor out, and all of us would run outside, and he'd pull the key out and have to put it in the front. And usually,
Well, you'd pull the top up, and that's where you would put the gas in. And it had a little toolbox in there, and you lifted the toolbox up, and the key was in there, and a couple of wrenches.
oh, I remember that. And he'd let us sit on top of the tractor until it got warm, and then we'd get off of it.
Yep, that's where the radiator was.
But Jim always liked to sit up front on the top so that he could just see every view. And then
Yep.
we'd sit on the big wheel wells, the outside of it. And Grandpa would have a kid on each leg.
Right.
He had kids all over him. And we would just literally go for tractor rides around his property.
And
Just
now
go up and
OSHA
down.
would throw Grandpa in jail for child endangerment.
There were a few times that he would get really close to the irrigation ditch.
Yep.
And we're just like, whoa, Grandpa. He didn't know. But he was just always there to give us such a good time. Just, they only had like one book in their house, that the George book, and he would read that to us, and he'd
Yep.
take us for tractor rides. And
On the other side of the garage was the tool shed. There was another shed back there.
And the chicken coops, but they were so run down, I don't know if we ever
And
went
then
in
the
there.
next to the where the tractor was the storage for the feed for the chickens.
oh, that's cool.
So there was a place where there was wheat and pellets. And that's where we stored the baskets to gather the eggs, anything else to fix the chicken coops, the shovels to shovel out the in the chicken coops.
It takes a lot to run a farm, doesn't it?
It took a lot to shovel those chicken coops out because the manure in the chicken coops would get so thick that you'd have to clean it out in between. When you'd get rid of a bunch of chickens, you'd have to go in there, and it was
Stinky mess.
you cough for 2 or 3 days
Oh.
Goodness.
because
So,
he had up to 2,000 chickens sometimes.
absolutely. That's a lot.
No wonder you had so many cats around you. I had to have mice eating that wheat.
Well, the skunks would eat the eggs,
Oh,
That's yucky.
so they would get in the coop.
oh.
So when we would go as a family, I think when we were really little, Grandpa still had cows,
Yeah.
very few chickens.
He didn't have any chickens when
Okay.
I was around.
Okay, then no chickens at all. I just remember the cows anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, he didn't really have the cows. It was just the skeleton of the barn.
Yeah.
And so really that's mostly what I remember, is just we would discover what used to be outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked their front porch, but I didn't because of the wood. Like, you couldn't go
Slivers.
barefoot at all. You
No.
couldn't even tiptoe because the sliver would just find you.
Yes.
But it was
So-
fun to sit on the cement rail around.
Yes. And I have a picture of that too, where we're all sitting around the front porch and just being together with our shoes on, and that's okay. But pretty much nothing outside was welcoming to bare feet, right?
No.
It was just, you didn't want to go barefoot. There were red ant nests, especially like further up, and then you had the porch with the slivers. And and crusty grass on the outskirts because Grandpa took really good care of the grass and it was green. But
On the rocky, gravelly road that
Yes.
you could not. It was sharp
And Grandpa
rocks.
tried to grow grass,
he
He
did.
did.
but Elmo across the street kept coming and poisoning the grass and the tree. Grandpa's neighbor, Elmo.
And his cats.
Oh, poor
Oh.
Elmo.
Don't say anything.
Oh, that's funny. So that's why it was so important when Allison, I almost called her Emily, when Allison threw her shoe out the window, Mom was like, "Nope, we got to get her shoe because
Right.
the porch and the ants and the grass and the gravel."
Well, there really wasn't a place in Delta to buy kids shoes.
Well, actually, the only thing I remember, we would get jelly shoes when those were popular. Grandma would buy them for Sherry and Allison and I. But those things, we would wear them out and then you get sweaty and then they'd fall right off of you. And
Oh.
but they were cute. We liked them. So Dad and Mom, what was your favorite thing about the property, the outside property?
Just seemed endless. But they had open sewers. And that was kind of
Ew.
nasty, but that's what they did. They didn't have a built-in sewage system. When you flush the toilet, the stuff would go out into the
There was a ditch about
side.
200 feet away from the house, and the pipe would come from the toilet and the bathtub underground, and it would dump out into that ditch.
I had no idea about
and so
that.
that's why they had special toilet paper.
And Grandma didn't want you flushing the toilet too much because if you went outside and there was water all over the ground at that point, it would be kind of mushy.
Well, if you flushed it too much, then it would plug up because there wasn't a lot of run off.
Oh, the angle wasn't too
Right,
steep.
so it was a deep ditch, but
Is that I remember her saying you can use 3 squares of toilet paper.
well, I've shoveled the crap out of that ditch to clean it out before, so.
So it's no big deal for 2 people in a house, but when you add
Right,
6
but
more
when you
guests,
add a lot more people.
then that's a big deal. So let's see where we're at.
And Grandma didn't want Grandpa climbing down into that ditch.
I want to talk about, okay, so I loved what Grandma would cook for us. She was just, and going to the store with her. I remember going with Mom, you and Grandma, and it was just so fun because Grandma was such a good planner and she made the best stuff. And what was your favorite thing, Mom?
Well, there were many favorite things, but one thing she would always have was mixed vegetables with some cream of chicken soup and some chicken pieces, and then you'd mix all that up in a big cake pan type, and then she would have biscuits on top.
Buttermilk biscuits on top.
And so
bake it.
she'd bake that in about 20 minutes, and it was hot and tasty and homey. And then her cookies, they were the most famous, and nobody could ever make them. And so Julie tried one time, and she had to add extra flour, and she had to...
I failed the first couple times. I thought there's
But
no
she
way we can
got
do
it.
this.
And we had a family reunion at Christmas time, and she put those cookies that she baked into the ice cream bucket with layers of wax paper and froze them and then brought them out. And one of the boys said, how did you get Grandma's cookies here?
They
But then
freaked
she
out.
would always have Jello, some raspberries inside, some raspberry Jello with a pretzel crust, and they always had these big pieces of jerky that were just must have been wonderful steaks to begin with.
They're so papery thin.
And hard as a rock.
And then Grandpa's pink mints that he had.
Yep, all their good
Grandma's
stuff.
muffins.
Oh, and she made peach raspberry jam.
And Grandma
And
made the
we
best
still
eggs.
make the peach
because
raspberry
she
jam.
did.
It's because Grandma cooked the bacon and then left the bacon grease in the pan. And then as she's frying the eggs, she uses a big spoon and ladles the bacon grease over the top of the egg to cook it with the hot bacon grease.
So they were sunny side
Yum.
up, but they were cooked all the way through.
And they were covered with bacon grease.
Ooh.
If anyone ever wants that peach raspberry jam, we still make it to this day out of
I
canned peaches
know.
and frozen raspberries and raspberry jello along with the sugar.
And Aunt Marlena makes that for her kids and
Yes.
for her neighbors, and it's
an
so
easy
good.
way to do it. Grandma did it the hard way. We know how to do it the easy way.
She would do it with fresh peaches, and it is very yummy with fresh peaches. But a number 10 can of canned peaches that are drained and then ground up makes a great peach substitute.
So if I'm ever missing Grandma, I will make her bran muffins, because that always, we will talk about breakfast time, but we can do it now. I don't care.
Fine. Well, that's what we'd have. She'd always have the best kind of bacon, eggs, muffins, orange juice, or whatever leftover you might want from the night before.
Well, I loved her recipe for the 6-week.
Yeah,
Bran muffins, so you
bran
could keep 'em
muffins.
in
And
your-
You still can make those today.
You could keep the batter in your fridge for 6 weeks, I
Right.
think. And so if I want to ever go back, I'll make a muffin and I'll put warm butter on it and that raspberry peach jam, and close my eyes and take a bite, and I'm right back at her kitchen
That's
table.
right.
It's breakfast time. Grandpa's got food all over.
Because home is a
And the longer
feeding.
the mix was in the fridge, the better you tasted after eating one. The better you felt.
It was just so magical and special being there with them. They made it so special for us because
Yes, they did.
they just, you knew that you were loved and that they wanted you to be around and that they loved and cherished their family.
Yes.
But breakfast was where you learned who they were.
Yes.
And we would kneel around the table for family prayer in the morning, and Grandpa was the only one that would pray in the morning.
Well, he insisted on being the one that said the prayer
He said
Yeah.
the prayer. Everyone had to kneel at their chair.
on their vinyl kitchen chairs.
Yes.
Mhm.
Those light brown ones.
Or were they orange?
Oh, man.
Probably a little of both.
Started out orange, now light brown.
So we would always have a really good breakfast. And then in the daytime, we would just go for drives, go to see IPP or one of the
Oak
reservoirs.
City
or
Canyon with their fresh spring water.
And the
And the Mormon
crickets.
crickets.
Oh, that was the only time I ever saw. They're like 2 inches long.
And then you would run over the crickets all over the road going up to the canyon. And when you come down, every cricket that was run over had 30 crickets eating it.
So you'd run those over, and the popping sound was terrible. And Jeff was
There were
2.
literally millions.
It was crazy. Jeff was 2 at the time, and we went to get spring water, and the crickets were everywhere. And at one point, he was surrounded by them and just screaming, and we had to save him and put him back in the back of the truck.
Were they in the water too? Because I wasn't on that
Not
trip.
that I remember. I don't think I would have drank it.
No. Well,
But
it
the
was-
kids were sitting in the back of the truck with their feet dangling, and the crickets
Yep.
were trying to get them.
Oh, memories. And then we'd go for tractor rides or go shopping. I remember we watched a movie once at the movie theater. There was fun to do there, and you guys would take us to the swimming pool there with the slide and the parades. I mean, there was just a lot to do, but it was really relaxing.
Yes. Oh, and the Delta mustard was mayonnaise and mustard mixed together to go on the hot dog.
You had to
And
have
that
a Delta
was
hot
so
dog. They were
good.
10 cents a piece.
Those were so good.
We'd go get a couple of dozen Delta hot dogs and bring them home and eat them.
And you'd tell us, have as many as you want, and we would. My favorite part of going to Delta was the nighttime. Was just everyone winding down for the day, and it just got more quiet, and the sky was twilight, and we'd go and sit on the porch and talk until the mosquitoes came out. Then we had to run in the house, and that was just, Grandma would play cards with a couple kids or whoever wanted to play cards, and we'd watch the nightly news. And well, we would have eaten ice cream before, but we had our nightly ice cream.
And Grandma had her diary, and she'd write down the temperature and the weather and who was there and what we were doing every night.
And what was so fun about the nighttime too is they had a hide-a-bed, and so there was just, we would all be in different directions trying to put all the beds together, and some of the kids would sleep on the floor because they wanted to. Jim loved sleeping by the front door, by that little nook where the bench was.
I used to love to get their newspaper because Grandma would bring their daily newspaper, and it would say, Bob and Louise, Carlene, and their kids came to town to visit the Hollies today.
That was big news.
All these kind of newses were in this newspaper. Dorothy has an ingrown toenail, or
Clifton Carlene's coat was found.
It was always kind of funny to see that visitors were acknowledged by the newspaper.
That's pretty neat. Well, my favorite thing with the night was pulling apart the hide-a-bed and getting that bed going, because the girls could always sleep there, and Grandma's green and white checkered sheets. And I just was so excited to be able to sleep there and just be part of their lives. And by then we'd have family prayer, and by then Grandma had the toilet paper pinned to her hair, and
Yep.
she was in her night dress and ready to go to bed, and Grandpa would have fallen asleep at least 3 times before watching the news, and
then sleeping the whole night through.
well, actually there were too many times with the ice cream and drinks at night that we would have to get up to go to the bathroom. And that is the funniest part ever. Because you guys would sleep in the slippery room on that brass bed. If you even thought about moving, that bed squeaked. Mm-hmm. If you even breathed wrong, it squeaked. Mm-hmm. And so I think the squeak alone would alert Grandma. So did you ever walk by Grandma's bed without waking her up?
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of.
She was the lightest sleeper, and I'm sure we talked about this with her episode, where she always had a flashlight ready to go. Mm-hmm. But the only time Sherry and I were in the slippery room was when we stayed with them for 2 weeks. Grandma came and picked us up, and she spoiled the crap out of us and took care of us. And we had so much fun. So we got the brass bed, and we thought, how do Mom and Dad handle this bed? Because it was so noisy.
Sometimes we were sure and got the hide-a-bed.
And so the nighttime was so scary for me because no sibling would go with me to the bathroom. And as a little kid, that huge kitchen was so dark, and there weren't really curtains that fully covered the windows. It was just half curtains. So it was a dark room, and you'd hurry and sneak there because there's no way you would go by Grandma and that staircase, which was just a nightmare. And then Grandpa snoring. Because Grandpa at that point was so old, we just didn't know. I remember always thinking, I hope Grandpa doesn't die in the night. So I'd round the corner to the bathroom, hurry and go in that short hallway and go to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, you turn the light on, but it's that dark, ominous window. And you're just like, oh, I need to hurry and go back to bed.
Right. They didn't really have any lights outside.
And the curtain only went halfway up. So if people were standing at the top step of the outbuilding, they could see in the bathroom.
And the cellar's just right there down a bit. Yep. And you're just like, that's a creepy place anyway. I don't know. That was just nuts. And so you couldn't walk by Grandma, and you really tried not to go to the bathroom at night. So in the morning was also a favorite, because I need you to talk about Grandpa Dad in the mornings.
Well, Grandpa would sit on a chair between the kitchen and the living room. And Grandpa was always an early riser. So he was up waiting for us to get up. And Stella would be sitting in the kitchen going, Fawn, let him sleep, let him sleep. And if one of us even moved, Grandpa would go, he's awake, he's awake.
It was Christmas morning every morning for him to watch us
Yep.
wake up.
Well, we can understand that because when we have family sleeping over, we're early risers too, and we're just waiting for them to get up so we can start our day too.
So that's really what it was. Grandpa's
Yeah.
like, I can finally start my day.
Exactly. Exactly.
Darn it. I thought
We
we were
had
that
everything.
special that he was like, oh, I just want to watch them sleep.
I know that was it too.
Well, Grandma kept yelling at him to be quiet. Let the
Leave him
kids
alone,
sleep.
Fawn.
And he had things to do.
And then we would still just kind of gradually wake up, watch The Price is Right while breakfast was being
Every
made.
morning.
That was so fun. And then
Yeah.
we go to breakfast and just
Bob
be together. That was my favorite. I think, do you have any favorite sayings that Grandpa or Grandma had?
Well, Grandpa used to end every sentence with then.
Or there?
Well,
In the
Or
hills
there.
Give us an example.
He's like, we need to go to Delta there. We need to go get some ice cream there.
Jim said his favorite was, let's go in the hills there. Yeah, they had. And then everything to Grandpa was tasty.
Tasty.
Yes.
Or if he had milk, and he always had a glass of milk, if you had a can of Sprite or root beer or something, he would say, pour some of that in here.
Yep.
And then he'd drink it and say tasty, and we would just gag walking away.
Yes.
Or I think the only swear word he ever used was "oh hell."
Yeah, but in his
But you
deep,
never looked
gravelly
at it
voice.
as a swear word. It's just part of what he said.
Right. It's so true. I like that. Do you remember a funniest moment in Delta? Just something that while you think about that, when I was asking Jim that question, he said, because he would stay with them for the summers, he said the funniest thing ever was that Grandpa Holly would watch WWF with Jim, the World Wrestling Federation, like that fake wrestling. He would watch it with him and watch
Well, the
boxing.
funniest thing I remember is going to Losey's to find a
Yep.
battery for Grandma.
And we have that
But-
full story.
Yeah.
We'd come in for lunch after working in the fields, and Grandpa liked to turn on baseball
Or anything BYU.
and watch. And we'd sit around the kitchen table listening to BYU basketball on the radio. And Grandpa'd be hollering, and
That's pretty funny.
Yes. Oh, and then at the end of the year, well, in the fall time when they dug up their potatoes,
McCormick would dig up potatoes
they made
for
potato chips. with
potato
those-
chips. And McCormick would let anyone, once they had dug them up, would let anyone go get potatoes. And these potatoes were half the size of my kids.
Oh, yeah.
We had fun picking up potatoes, and we would take them home, and we'd use them all winter long. And the kids loved to go out there and pick potatoes up off the ground.
They spoiled us so much, you
Yes.
guys. Do you remember a scary moment in Delta? Oh, yeah, I asked you the funny.
Anytime riding with Grandpa.
Yeah, in his truck or tractor, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Grandpa, when he got older, he drove by sound. And what I mean is, he'd get in the truck and he'd be driving down the road, and if he heard the front tire hit the gravel on the side of the road, he'd turn back onto the road.
So it didn't matter if he's driving at night
No,
either.
but when you got on the dirt road west of the house to go to Delta, there were 15-foot deep ditches on either side of the road. So it's not like you had a lot of recovery area.
You know what always baffled me? It was there was always a tire swing directly over the ditch. And I was always thinking as a kid, how do they even get on? Because it was really high up. I don't even know how they
Yeah.
did it. That's crazy. Let's see. What quirks did you love about Delta? Delta and Oasis to us are interchangeable. It's kind of the same place.
Well, cars and horses on the road together. You know, and just a little farm town where each little town, Sutherland and Hinckley and Deseret, they all had their own little places. They were each individual, and
and
That's
the
true.
parades and the
Parades
on
that
the
lasted 5
24th,
minutes
and
with everybody in the city in it.
We're done.
We're done. Don't blink.
but they were very patriotic. American flag, down home, good people.
I think so. You know what was interesting is I was showing Jim this book that Aunt Chris put together about Grandma and Grandpa Carling, and I saw their wedding picture, and I said that's the neatest thing because look, it has Grandma Carling's family all on right here, and Grandma Holly's or Grandpa Carling's family, which is Grandma Holly and Grandpa Holly and all of them. And they're all like they knew each other, and Jim said actually they really knew each other because they were in the same area, and that's kind of like a quirk too because there's no way that Mom, your family would know Dad's family
No.
that intimately at all.
No.
And so that's pretty cool. Like you married who you grew up with.
Right. Well, back in the old days when you couldn't travel a lot, that's who you married, with someone within a certain area where they all grew up and they all knew each other and they all married each other.
They did, and Grandma and Grandpa were each other's sweethearts. Well,
Yes,
Grandma and Grandpa
in high
Carling.
school. Mhm.
And of course their families knew each other. I don't know why that blew my mind because I didn't connect the dots that of course they knew each other and they served in church together and they served their neighbors together and they were each other's neighbors.
Right.
Are you
Right.
showing me the picture?
That's Grandpa Lee.
Grandpa Lee, which one was that?
That was Grandma Holly's ex.
Oh yeah. We even have pictures of Grandma Holly's Grandpa Carling's dad.
I only met him once after Dad and I were married.
So I'm curious. Oh, Dad, did you guys ever see the parlor door open?
No, I didn't.
I opened it a couple of times while I was there. Just because Grandma wanted us to wax underneath it so the doors would still slide.
Actually, the parlor was also a place for when somebody died. That's where the viewing was.
Did the
Was in
wakes
the
and stuff
parlor.
there.
At their house? Is that why it was so scary there at night?
Maybe.
Oh.
Maybe there were a lot of wakes there.
I don't
Let's
No,
know.
we,
go to the
we
Holly
opened the
house.
doors a couple of times because Grandma wanted them opened.
And aired out or something.
That's interesting. Oh man. And Dad, do you remember some of the projects? Because Grandma always had project lists for you.
Whenever I'd get there, Grandma'd have a list, especially when I was married. A list of things she wanted fixed. And
I only remember, I know you did stuff all the time, but I remember when you had to fix behind the coal
we
stove.
put the rock and stuff behind the wood stove.
And painted.
I don't know what that was. Something just went bang. It was probably the door because it's really windy outside. Sorry, Dad.
So we put the... We re-roofed the garage. Grandpa and I did with shake shingles. And we fixed the tractor a lot. We had to change one of the big tires on the tractor because it went flat. And that's a process because the tractor's half full of liquid.
Oh yeah.
The tire is.
So it's so heavy in itself
Right.
too.
And Grandpa got the wood stove. We bought the wood stove, and while installing it, we built a pad for it. And then we put artificial brick behind it so that there would be a barrier between the heat and the wall.
And that brick was really pretty.
So
You
that
guys
the
did
house
a good job.
wouldn't burn up. So that was a project Grandpa and I did.
As far as I remember, because we peeked through the house a couple years ago, that brick is still there. That red brick that you did, it's still there. Everything else is gutted in the house, but
Yeah, that
That's
wood
still
stove
there.
wouldn't be there anymore.
So that was just something that Grandpa and I spent a week doing. And
that's so cool. I wish I could remember all that. I'm sure we were just all exploring old chicken coops in the barn, and
you guys were busy.
yeah. We were busy trying to be kids playing in dirt and doing all the fun.
And we let you.
We needed it. We needed to do
There was a
that.
big claw bathtub we could get all you kids in and bathe you.
I want to know, how did Grandma and Grandpa make you guys feel special? Like, what were all the things that they
They
did
were
for you?
always willing to have you there or to come by and see you.
We loved having them come see us on their way to Bountiful.
Yeah.
Oh, they shared everything. It was the best days when Grandma would come and Grandpa. I knew she'd have a 5-pound brick of cheese, and I could make so many things for dinner with that. It was different than I always fixed. And she'd have her cookies and her jam and just a lot of things that we could sure use. But that was when they came to visit us. That wasn't Delta, but whenever we were in Delta, they always had special foods. That made you feel good. And the funniest thing was, Grandma would give the kids a $5 bill and say, "Now don't tell Grandpa." Mm-hmm. And then Grandpa'd turn around, give them a $5 bill. "Now don't tell Grandma."
And then most of the time they'd be like, "Did we give you money?" Because there were so many kids, they just would lose track.
Right.
"No, you didn't give me any money." I love how that, I remember you saying that Grandpa would say, "Hey, we slaughtered some cows, come on down and get some meat." And that was when you guys could really use some.
Right.
And so they were really first and foremost in being your example of being so generous and kind. And
they taught us very well.
And yeah, and you guys continued the legacy from them, with them. And I appreciate that. And you guys are such a good example. I try to share all I can too, and it's so fun to do that. Let's see. You know, speaking about all of that, really, yeah, that was the bones of Delta and their house and everything, but the heart of Delta. What was that for you guys? Who was the heart?
Grandma and Grandpa were the heart, but I had another Grandma and Grandpa that lived close by, the Bishop, Grandma and Grandpa Bishop.
Oh, how often did you visit
They lived
them?
in Hinckley, so whenever we went there, we went and saw Grandma and Grandpa Bishop until they moved to Bountiful. But Grandma and Grandpa Bishop lived in Hinckley, and sometimes we'd spend the night there, but whenever we had a big reunion on the Bishop side, we'd always stay at Grandma and Grandpa Holly's house, because there was never enough room to stay at Grandma Bishop's.
Right. I didn't know that.
And sometimes Steve would come and spend the night with us too, if we were all together.
Oh, that's neat. And Steve was on the Bishop's side, so
Right.
he'd stay at
Yeah.
Grandma and Grandpa Holly's house.
And he went
Wow.
rabbit hunting with us, and Steve and I were in the back of the truck, and Kim was driving the flatbed, and Steve and I both had rifles sitting on the cab looking for rabbits. And Kim saw a rabbit over to the right, so Kim gunned the truck and turned it hard to the right and knocked Steve and I both off the back of the truck into the sagebrush. And Kim just kept chasing the rabbit without us back there.
Oh my gosh. That's funny. So, when we moved Grandma and Grandpa, I mean, we've all been back to see their house several times in the property, and we have memories and nostalgia, but it never feels the same anymore because they aren't there.
That's right.
Well, that's what makes a home. It's not
the feeling.
not the bones of the home. It's the people in the home.
And we actually get to carry the memories with us, and we get to have that same feeling every time we think about them.
Right.
So I think learning from them, we just all need to do our best to really love those around us and just cherish them and make everything special as much as you can. And the hardest part for us was always saying goodbye. They would stand at the door with the screen door half open, the biggest smiles on their faces and waving and just
telling us to come back soon.
Yep. And then we would spend 5 minutes crying until we got to the Lone Tree Monument, and then we're like, okay, we've got a long drive to go. So I always left just missing them immediately.
Yep.
And couldn't wait for my next trip. And then usually we'd go around conference weekend in October.
Yeah.
And so I knew that we'd see them in a few months because they'd drive up. Grandma at 80 would drive in the winter to Salt Lake for
They
Christmas.
always spend it at Aunt Marlena's house.
Oh, what a fun time.
Yeah.
So it was really fun to see them where, Grandma has such a special place in my heart. And thank you for taking us always to go see them, because that's really what matters is family and just
That was
being
vacation
together.
for us.
Yeah, Grandma taught me how to play solitaire. Grandpa taught Jim patience with puzzles.
Yep.
And Grandpa taught us how to cheat with Uno. And he'd say, "You know."
No matter how many cards he had,
I think my favorite thing is that Grandma and Grandpa gave us their time, and they were there for us, and they really just thoroughly enjoyed us. And that made us feel like we were kings and queens on this earth. So that is such a cool thing to wrap that up. Not that it's ever over, because we have Delta inside of us always.
Yep.
And so if I ever get nostalgic, I'm going to make John take me down the wee bumps and go a little faster. I'm so glad you guys came on today and were willing to talk about this. This is some amazing family history that we've got documented now forever. Unless
and
someone
we may not be
deletes-
done with Delta yet.
It's so true, because we've learned so many life lessons with Grandma and Grandpa and Delta and the community. And you just never know. Like you said, if there's any cousins that want to come on or tell their stories or anything, they're so welcome.
That would be a
blast.
blast, yes.
I've asked Aunt Marlena, come on. And she's like, oh, no, I couldn't do that.
We may have to take the mountain to Muhammad.
There's just some special
Because Aunt
family.
Marlena would be a ball on this.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. We would have such a good time.
Yep.
Oh, well, Mom and Dad, thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
And guys, thanks for listening to our podcast and for hanging in there with us. And we're just having fun. And I get to figure out how to hit the space bar again.
Okay, we'll try the space bar again and see if the fridge light really does come on.
Okay, so this might be practice. See you later.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.